Isn't that funny? Now, I would have thought that type A personality would have been the 3.
Well, Robin Williams isn't exactly a type A personality in some ways, from what I know of him. I mean, he's living, I mean, he's working in order to have fun and to live, and I mean, his type A-ness is around having a good time and enjoying himself, I think. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing again. So
he'd have to take one of your tests.
We'd have to interview him.
Let's talk about the 8.
The 8 is called the boss. And the boss is someone who basically is always looking at power and who has the power. And I want to have the power. And the beauty of that is you have someone who's willing to take on the power and will say, you know, I want to know where you are, so it's confrontation. I mean, the archetypal boss is someone like the Godfather,
yes.
who says, you know, who has the power here. And the blessings are someone who's willing to take it on and to protect his whole clan. And, you know, someone who will go into a restaurant and say, you know, well, we're all here, so why don't we pull all the tables together and we'll begin to do that. And, you know, so the blessing can be that they'll take on all those kinds of responsibilities. And the difficulty can be that they'll just see what they have to do and what they want to do, and sometimes, you know, if someone gets in their way, it could be difficult.
So they could be controlling. The 8s could be very controlling.
They can be, sure.
And so now we have 9.
Right, and 9 is at the top of the circle, and it's sort of the point, it's called the mediator. And the 9 is someone who knows everybody else's point of view and can understand and sort of take on everybody else's point of view, but loses their own, so that they know what you're thinking, they know what somebody else is thinking. It's like they know all of your experience, but you ask them, you know, what do you want, or who are you, about something that's important, you know, like on a personal level. I mean, from the sublime to the ridiculous, like where do you want to go to the restaurant? Oh, wherever you want to go. I mean, because I don't want to have conflict. I want to keep things smooth and sort of go with the flow. And the beauty of that is, the blessing is that you have someone who sort of makes everybody else feel wonderful just by their natural way of being, you know. And the difficulty is that you have someone who, in a sense, has lost themselves, and their work is to find themselves.
So they're in the world, but they're not really participating the way that they could.
In a certain sense, because in order to participate, it's like, I want to belong. I want to, you know, belong to everything else. And if belonging to everything else means, you know, I don't want to have conflict, because then it doesn't feel like I belong in a certain sense.
Yeah. So they're afraid to assert themselves, and maybe like the 8 would.
Right. They're afraid to assert themselves like an 8 would assert themselves.
So now we've covered all 9, and I mean, certainly there is so much more to this than we've got time for a half hour to talk about. But very briefly, can you give us some ideas of what, let's say, a 5 and a 2 would be like together, or an 8 and a 1, or a 5 and a 6?
Sure. You could go through a whole matrix, and you could begin to make some pretty good guesses. So if you start with a 5 and a 2, for example, since that's the first one you brought up, 5s and 2s can be very drawn to each other, because you have a 5 who looks very sort of like, you know, independent, and I don't have any needs, and you have a 2 who sort of is drawn to that, and then the 5 might be drawn to a 2 because the 2 is very deeply emotional, and you have a 5 who's sort of up in his or her head and, you know, experiences a 2. It can be very attractive. The difficulty is you have someone who says, I want to take care of your needs and I'll become whatever you want, and you have somebody else who's saying sort of like, I'm going to go into my own private world. It can create an awful lot of tension if you don't understand that. And what tends to happen is the 2 comes more and more forward, and as the 2 comes more and more forward, the 5 goes more and more back.
5 would go back, that's right.
So that's a constant dance that's there, and if they don't really understand what's going on there, they can sort of see it through their own points of view and create a lot of difficulty.
So do you think just from hearing these stories, one can find out what number they are, or one can surmise what number they would be? I know, I have heard this, of course, so I know pretty much where I am. But I heard you mention my number, and I don't think it really fit me.
Well, it's because I'm picking out, you know, one quick characteristic of something. And that may not be the one that you resonated with the most.
No, not in determining, my number.
So you'd have to tell us what it was that made you know for sure what you were. I mean,
Oh, I'll tell you. I don't mind. Let the world know. I think I'm a 7 because I like options.
Because you like options. So pleasant options and generating pleasant options,
Yes, so. And brainstorming and coming up with ideas well, what are you? What number are you?
I'm a 4.
You're the tragic romantic?
Right.
Do we get along?
Well, we're drawn to each other. 7s and 4s, I mean, stereotypically are drawn to each other in that they both tend to be sort of very charismatic and intense. But nonetheless, there's a difficulty in that what you have is you have someone who wants pleasant options over there and wants to see sort of like, wants to be happy and wants to, in a certain sense, keep things pretty much on the surface in terms of depth of feelings. If it's going to cause pain, it's like, who would want to experience pain? And then you have a 4 who's saying like,
I want pain.
Well, I want all the depth of all feelings. I want all kinds of intensity and, happiness. What's that? That's sort of like, the surface of things. So it takes a lot of work, for 2 people to sort of go into, sort of what their ways of making sense are and to say, that's just my way, and I'm not going to project that onto the rest of the world.
I heard you talking and I realized, what number I felt that I resonated with, but there was a lot of some of the other numbers that I thought I could identify with. Do the numbers blend into other numbers as well?
It's a complicated question. You are only one number, you have only one structure. Mm-hmm. So, and the way to understand that is to really know the fundamental way that you pay attention and how you organize experience, because the behaviors can look alike. So you really have to look at motivation. You have to look at the story behind the story as opposed to just the surface of it. Now, having said that, if we were looking at our map, what you could see is every number has numbers on either side of it, and that can color the number, the primary number that you are. And there are also lines in the map, and the lines predict what will happen when you're under a great deal of stress or when you're feeling particularly secure. You move along the map, but you move from your own point of view. So in a certain sense, you have relationship with 5 of the 9 numbers. Only one of them is your core number, however, the core way that you make sense of things.
And discovering what other people are, I guess that's just observing the way they function in the world and then do as you do, just kind of surmise at that.
Well, the beauty of this thing is that you really realize that people are different. It's not like they're strange variations of you. Mm-hmm. I mean, before I really knew this, I knew that people were different, but I thought that people, I didn't really understand that there were these fundamentally different ways of processing things. So I thought everybody who didn't have intense emotion, they were repressing them, and why wasn't I more able to get out of my heart and sort of think things through? But I didn't really understand, and this gave a whole matrix, a whole way of making sense of things, so that I could say, we're different. And then the real beauty of this on the surface is that...
Got to run.
We got to stop?
We're running out of time.
The beauty is that you could learn how energetically to have the experience of each of these points. Mm-hmm. But the last thing I'd want to say is that our personalities, in a sense, are an obscuring of something deeper. And the real promise of this system, why it's a map of a much greater map, is that it tells us what it is. Each of these points has something that it avoids.
Well, there's so much more to it than I even have time to go into right now. And I hate to cut you off. And I know people can reach you because you do consulting work, and you can help with your workshops for anybody who wants to know more and how it all relates to each other. Thank you very much for being here. I hate to cut you off.
That's okay.
And I hate to end this show. It's been so wonderful for me experiencing Dr. Hahn. And if you'd like to know more about him, the number will be on the screen at the end of the show. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Good night.